Well, according to Google Street View, I'm on Highgrove Road in Cheadle, and this is number 12. So this is where it all started. And to give it all a bit of historical context, that's the Everly Brothers with their current number one, Cathy's Clown, playing in the background at this, well, it's not really a party, is it? It's a gathering, an inaugural gathering of the great and good from this part of the world who have got an interest in Cine. And they're all responding to a suggestion that was put out by local photography shop owner Reg Taylor. And Tom Lewis, whose home that was, became the first chairman of Cheadle and Gatley Cine Club. Now, in the 60 years that the club's been going, there have been numerous changes to the way we carry out our hobby, our amateur filmmaking, I should say. And I wanted to put together a little collection of films, hopefully to illustrate 6 phases over the 6 decades of the way we go about making films. And really the one you've just seen is a good example of the basic form of home movie. And I want to go on a little bit to demonstrate how things perhaps got a little bit more complicated. And the first clip that I want to show illustrates the making of the first club movie, or at least I assume it is, because it was filmed on location in September of 1960, and it was called Prelude to a Prize Giving. Now, what you can see here are some behind the scenes shots of the location, and the actual film, which is a comedy and has a script of sorts, runs for a couple of minutes, and well, have a look and see what you think. Well, I hope our club films have got a little bit better than that as time's gone by. The technology has changed so much, hasn't it? It really was a difficult operation, an engineering operation to make films in those days. Everything was so much heavier and of course so much more expensive that retakes often weren't an option. So I think we can probably forgive them for some of their initial shortcomings. I want to go on now to another film because apart from live action there was also a big aspect of home filmmaking was to do with animation. So A for Apple was a 1983 stop motion animation by Don Shaw. Very good in terms of technique, but it's so slow. I mean, I sped the pictures up by a factor of 4 just to make it, because I think you can appreciate the draftsmanship, but the pace of films in those days was much slower than we've come to expect nowadays. Now, a couple of years earlier, the club had celebrated its 20th anniversary, and I'm just looking at the programme now for 1980, and on June the 12th, they were still meeting on June the 12th in that year, and the final the final meeting is called Final Fuddle. So I wonder what on earth they were doing in those days. Just looking at the list of personalities. Don Shaw was chairman. Phil Guy was the publicity officer, my word. Annual subscription £4 a year. Now the next film I'm going to show you is a Cine film. It probably comes under the general heading of being a holiday movie. I believe it was filmed with a silent 8mm standard 8 camera, but a little bit of post-production has now come into the equation, and with some sound effects and about a half-decent commentary, you can turn it into an interesting, enjoyable, watchable film.
The only way to reach St Kilda is by one of the Scottish National Trust's chartered boats, which takes groups from Mallaig half a dozen times a year to work on the restoration of the old village on the island. An overnight stop is made at Lochmaddy, and then it's across 80-odd miles of the open ocean to what you hope will be landfall on the farthest inhabited island west. Accommodation on deck, and not a very steady deck at that, was decidedly limited, and the hatch cover was the only place where one could stretch out full length. We steered by means of a compass and the road map of the British Isles. But in spite of this, and after what they said was quite a good crossing, we sighted land some 22 hours out from Mallaig. We anchored some distance from shore in Village Bay and were soon getting our first somewhat unstable view of our home for the next 2 weeks. Our first job was to transport our belongings up to the houses, which had been rebuilt by previous working parties from ruins like these into habitable dwellings, which we were the first party to use as accommodation, although on our arrival only one house had been completely finished. There were storm shutters to be built for all the windows, and a waterproof coating of tar to be put on all the roofs. Lighter jobs were found for the ladies of the party, of course. And there was always a tea break to relieve the strain before work continued, often in a most unprofessional manner. And sometimes with quite unorthodox tools. On our first day off, we made a quick tour of the island, past the now unused sheep pens, and up to the gap, where a prone position was the safest from which to look down into the pounding sea below. And northwards to Borroway and its stacks. Here we had our first close-up view of a fulmar, before we climbed to the summit of Connacher, the highest hill on the island. And whilst on the slopes, we came across this baby snipe. Which we hoped would find its parents before the gulls attacked it. Like this great skua, after having a good look round, attacked us. Having reached the coast once more, we made our way by a rather hazardous cliff path to this tunnel through a headland. The return journey over the slippery rock was decidedly dangerous, and we were very thankful for the safety line, although the cameraman had to manage without one. All that remained now was the long walk back to the village. The village is really a single street built well above the shoreline and encircled on the landward side by a wall, originally intended to keep the sheep out of the village and away from the crops. In the single street, the remains of the last inhabited houses alternate with the old black houses, now also ruined, but once used as byres. A collection of their contents has been salvaged and is now kept in a small museum. The old graveyard, in which only 3 stones bear inscriptions, is similarly protected by a dry stone wall over 6 feet high. But whether inside or outside the wall, the cleats are everywhere, all built to the same pattern. They stretch from the water's edge to the summit of the highest hillside. They were used as a storage place for the turfs, which the islanders used to burn instead of peat, for household stores, and for the dried carcasses of thousands of fulmars. Some are quite small, others reaching over 20 feet in length. So long as they retain their high turf roof, they remain intact. But once this has gone, they soon fall into decay. This one was used as a shippen for the island bull and roofed with part of one of their old boats. Not all the mounds were cleats, and this was a much older building called the Fairy House, and reputed to have been built in a day, and probably of prehistoric origin. Competing in quantity with the cleats, of which there have been estimated to be some 900, are the sheep, which are now free to roam over the whole island. Some of these have been marked with coloured tabs to facilitate study of their movements, but they are good runners, and it needs an energetic naturalist to catch them. Another unique feature of the animal life is the St. Kilda mouse, which we caught in order to photograph, and then of course released again. The other more or less permanent occupants of the island are the army. They have done their best to make life as much like home as possible. All this in spite of the fact that the total traffic on the island consists of 2 Land Rovers, a lorry and a recovery vehicle. One day we made a trip to Glen Bay on the far side of the island, passing not only the remains of many sheep, but also reminders of less happy days. But there were always the flowers to cheer us up, whether in rocky crevices or as tiny patches of colour underfoot. There was also an abundance of these tiny mushrooms. Towards the end of the bay are the remains of what is thought to be a prehistoric village, and one of the buildings, known as the Amazon's House, contains this shelf-like recess. The object of our trip was to film seals, but although we heard them singing in the distance, we saw little more than a snout in close-up. We did catch a glimpse of some birds by the sea, including this solitary shag. but there were plenty of oyster catchers about. And on the cliffs some puffin, and even a couple of rather tatty starlings. Our return journey took us along the slopes of Ruhrval to within sight of Doon. Only a narrow strip of water, but almost impossible to cross. And we had to be content with a view of the steeply sloping island from here. One day we found a young puffin, and that too had to be photographed before we returned it to its natural element. On Sunday we went to church, the first time a service had been conducted there by an ordained minister since the island was evacuated in 1930. And although it was impossible to film inside the church, our resident artist produced this impression. The service was followed by coffee in the officers' mess. Quite a luxurious place by St Kildan standards. And rather different from our cookhouse, nicknamed the Friary, which was inside an old black house. Another trip took us along the west coast, where the leader of our party gave us a demonstration on the Lover's Stone. Although other members were not so adventurous. Here again we came across fulmars in great numbers. There was even this half-grown chick, like a ball of fluff, which Jim held for the photographers, although he couldn't get near enough to this puffin to do the same. As we approached the top of the Cambia, one of its inquisitive residents came to inspect us at close quarters. From this vantage point, we could look along the north coast, across the narrow neck of land which forms the Cambia Isthmus, and on to the west coast, along which we had just come. Looking to the northwest, we could see the island of Soye, home of the famous sheep of that name. And see the narrow bridge of land which almost joins it to Herta. Looking downwards, there were the outcrops of rock absolutely covered by resting seals. But the weather was none too clement, and we were glad to reach the warmth of the village houses once more. We used a card purchased in the army canteen and collected the island's own unique postmark. Finally, with the mist hanging low, the time came for our departure. And once again we crowded aboard the Glencaradale. Watched by the army personnel and waved off by their captain. As we put to sea, we passed close by the towering cliffs of Doon and were able to see another passage, invisible from the mainland. We left the shelter of Village Bay and approached the stacks of Lee and Armin off the coast of Borroway, and the sea began to show its paces. We passed between the stacks and had a good view of the thousands of gannets nesting there. Finally, to a farewell from these graceful birds, we made for the open sea and Malayed once more.
Well, I hope you found that interesting and for its time a good film, bearing in mind the technological problems and difficulties of filmmakers in that period. And I should say, Jerry Clegg tells me, yes, it was Bob and his wife Frida. So Bob and Frida Bridge made the film. And he tells me it was 1957, so it's slightly out of sync with with my chronology, but it ties in with that style of filmmaking. Now I'm going to show you, I think, a good film, and it deserves a complete showing, I think, on its own. It's called Magic Carpet, and it's listed as a Cheadle and Gatley club film. And some of the effects are really very good. I guess they must have been done stop motion. So coming to the end of the Cine section of this video, just have a little look at a bit of Magic Carpet.
Yes, they're Arabic. I bought the car in Persia.
Oh, modern magic carpet, eh?
I wish it was. Make my life a lot easier.
Well, must be off now. Cheerio.
Cheerio.
Salam. I am the car.
What the? What on earth's going on? Oh, this is ridiculous. It can't just disappear. Oh, this sort of thing doesn't happen. Well, no. Surely, no, I must have imagined it. Must have done. I mean, it's impossible. How can a car possibly disappear? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous things. Well, I mean, it's unheard of. I mean, anybody think I was stupid if I told them? I mean, no, definitely. It must be imagination. Couldn't have happened. No. I must be dreaming. Did I open it? No. I suppose I must have. No, I didn't. Perhaps I didn't shut it properly. But No, I remember getting into the car, shutting the door. Well,
This should convince him.
Here then.
oh no, not again. Oh, I don't mind a joke, but this is taking things a little too far.
At your service, Sahib. Enter. Home, Sahib?
What? Yes, please. I wonder. Open. Close. Open. Close. It's absolutely marvellous. Let me show you. You watch. Open. Close. There you are. You have a go.
Open.
Use your arm.
Open. Close. Open. Close. Open.
Yeah. Take me to the office.
Not even, please.
Away to the garage, you.
Yeah. Only a week, and already he treats me like a slave.
Good morning. Wait there.
He thinks I am a dog.
Come on.
Again he orders. Pay a sag.
Stop.
It is too much. come on! That. I will teach this infidel a lesson. Stop! Oh!
What is he playing at?
Oh!
Relax by rail. Still not. How on earth do I get in? Have to break the window. That's better. I hate doing this, but here goes.
Oh, no, you don't. Now I will teach you your manners.
Help! Oh, let me out! No! Please stop! Close it! Ah, the window. No, no, you can't. Please, please don't leave me. No, please, come back, come back. Oh no, oh, come back, come back. Oh no! No, no, I've had enough. I'm selling it.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to.
Well, I'm very interested. That's a very good car, these. How long have you had it?
Oh, 3 or 4 years now. Well, it's been a good car, isn't it? Hasn't done many miles.
Let's have a look. Open up the box, will you?
Yes, sir.
Right. Seems not bad.
Oh yes, the key. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Thank goodness.
Mr. Francis,
Yes.
we're making inquiries about an MG car number 630MLG, which we understand you recently sold to Penkethman.
Yes, yes.
The garage report that there was something odd about the car's disappearance.
Well, I sold it. Now I want nothing more to do with it. That's that.
I see. Under the circumstances, you wouldn't object to our taking a look round.
No, no. Carry on. Oh no.
The magic carpet, which I think shows some excellent special effects, because actually this film was a very early one. It was 1965. You see it was made by 4 members of the club, and I noticed that E.G. Chatton well, actually gave a talk to the club that year, and it was all about how to put sound on tape and stripe. Indication of the complexities involved in putting together a film where you had, presumably, the sound mix would have had to have been done using a tape recorder, which would have been almost in sync with the pictures, and then copied across onto the magnetic stripe on the film. So, I think for its day, that shows an excellent sort of quality of filmmaking, and I say special effects which I can't see how they did it, so brilliant. We'll now jump on. So in terms of the chronology of how I'm trying to do this, we ought to be at about the 1990s when the club's 30 years old, and here's a programme from that particular time, and I see that now where did I see it? Oh yes, there's a Desert Island Films, May of that year, and I think that had been appearing occasionally on the programme since 1980. But interesting, looking down the list of officers, I see the programme secretary was Sheila Andrew, and Bob Chanley was one of the committee members. So that, I think, concludes my look through some of the earlier Cine productions made by members of the club. I'll give you a chance to take a break now, and when I resume in part 2, we'll look at 3 different eras of video production and see what I've chosen to show you after you've had a cuppa.